So every Democrat voted against no taxes on tips and no tax on overtime. All of them, literally all of them voted against tax cuts and cutting wasteful spending just because they hate Donald Trump. This is why Democrats are at an all-time low approval rating. Well, at least in my lifetime. The things they're voting against are like 80-20 issues. Worst case, they're like 70-30 for Americans. I mean, it's unbelievable. In fact, Trump's platform on no tax on tips and overtime, it polled so well that Kamala Harris stole it from Trump on the campaign trail.
Because when I get to office, we are going to not charge taxes on tips, people making tips.
And eliminate taxes on tips for service and hospitality workers.
We've come here today to talk about the biggest promise I think that the restaurant workers have had in a long time, and that's no tax on tips. And in our case, we mean it. Somebody that I know just copied it, but you know that's not going to happen.
And the Democrats' argument now is that, oh, well, it's not paid for. Oh, right now. Now Democrats are like some sort of fiscal hawk. Okay. Yes, we have to offset these $4.5 trillion in tax cuts that are in this bill, which I totally support, including lowering the corporate tax rate to 15% as they did. That's going to attract international business. And this is what Democrats don't understand. The component of this is growth. I think we pay entirely too much in taxes because taxation is theft. But if we have these tax cuts in there, they have to be paid for. So how do you do it? Well, something the Democrats don't like to look at is history for a variety of issues, but specifically on this one. Every time in the history of America that there have been tax cuts, growth has followed, resulting in record tax revenue. So yes, they raised the debt limit, which I'm not thrilled about, but the growth, in addition to the tariffs that Trump is putting on, can offset this long term, which gets me to Doge. Elon lined out some facts of the numbers and what we need to be cutting during the first cabinet meeting, or we're going to go bankrupt.
We do need to move quickly if we're to achieve a $1 trillion deficit reduction in financial year 2026. It requires saving $4 billion per day, every day, from now through the end of September. But we can do it, and we will do it.
I mean, we have honestly just let this go too long. We have to get to $1.5 trillion in cuts just this year to get to a point of sustainability. And Doge can identify, or they can cancel all the contracts they want. But if Congress doesn't get serious and actually codify those into actual law, then it's for nothing. It doesn't matter, and we'll just find ourselves in court with Democrats and government labor unions for the next 4 years. But I want to give credit where due to Republicans. Sometimes I'm hard on them, but they actually address the third rail of our fiscal policy. Entitlement programs. I was really impressed by this. This is the elephant in the room. That accounts for about 80% or $4 trillion of our budget. We lined out last night over $200 billion just in overcharges in Medicare and Medicaid that could get cut today. And if you're reading the headlines, it says, sure, $2 trillion in cuts, and it has a bunch of people on edge who actually rely on this, but that's not, don't worry, it's not anything close to that. The fine print is that's over 10 years. So it's actually really only $200 billion a year, which is exactly what we outlined last night in overcharges, funny enough. We've talked about this before. Social Security, that's $1.5 trillion. You can't touch that because people have paid into it their whole lives, which, by the way, under this bill, will no longer be taxed, which I also think is fabulous. So the focus on the cuts are coming out of Medicare, which is an $874 billion item. Medicaid at $864 billion, and other welfare programs at $505 billion. And look, I'm sorry, we cannot continue to be a welfare state anymore. And this is the first step to reining that in. This is the first time I think Republicans have actually tackled this issue, and I'm here for it. But something I just shook my head at was this: $110 billion more in border security. Okay, I'm keeping an open mind here, but Trump has already stopped border crossings by 90+%, so why do they need more money? What I'm hoping it's for is that it's funding that will set in place border security that won't allow, God forbid, we have another Biden-type president, that will keep them from being able to open the border like it is. Like a wall maybe? I don't know. You get $100 billion more in defense spending. But didn't Pete Hegseth just call for an 8% cut across all departments over the next 4 years? I'm wondering, did these congressmen even walk over to the Pentagon and talk to some of these cabinet secretaries? I hope so. We got out of 2 major global conflicts. We got out of Iraq, we got out of Afghanistan, and we never reduced the budget after that. Why? They did announce today that they're auditing the Afghanistan withdrawal, but that's not actually going to save us any money. We're just going to know how much we lost. Thanks. Look, if we're not fighting wars, why do we need to keep raising the spending for defense? Am I crazy? I mean, come on, guys. Nearly $1 trillion budget over there, and they never pass an audit, and you gave them more money? But in true DC fashion, none of these numbers are final. And this is why America hates government. You people have been doing this for 2 months, and you haven't ironed out how you're going to cut these things specifically. This bill heads over to the Senate now for a process called reconciliation, which I hate this word. It's a fancy way of saying more debate. Once Congress passes something, as long as it's basically only about money stuff and not all kinds of pet projects, they can send it to the Senate, where under reconciliation, they only need 51 votes instead of 60 vote majorities. This is how they passed Obamacare that every Republican voted against, the original Trump tax cuts that every Democrat voted against. Some stuff will inevitably get watered down, and we will likely get a bunch of tax cuts, but I think some of the cuts will get moderated. But Rand Paul, one of the few voices of real fiscal sanity, proposed an amendment for the bill in the Senate that will cut $1.5 trillion this year. Tweeting out, "The Senate is voting on my amendment to cut spending by at least $1.5 trillion. We voted for fiscal responsibility when we elected real Donald Trump, and the Senate should vote for it now." He went on to say, "Americans will pay dearly for Congress's inability to say no to the welfare and warfare state." And guess what? That amendment that he proposed got voted down with 29 Republicans voting against it. Like, what are we doing here? Look, the Treasury can't account for almost $5 trillion in payments. Medicare sent $2.7 trillion to people who shouldn't have even been eligible. The Pentagon lost track of $2 trillion worth of stuff. Social Security has millions of people over the age of 100 on their rolls. There's room to cut. But this is DC. Everyone wants to talk about cuts, but no one wants to actually cut their department. So we do this dance every time. Keep in mind, we're currently spending at COVID levels under this continuing resolution that Republicans passed. That was Nancy Pelosi's budget. If Republicans don't get this right, there goes the House next year.
He loves the Constitution. He fights for what's right. He hates the bad guys. He's a freedom warrior. He's your freedom warrior. Watch Carl Higbie every weekday on Newsmax.